Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I was on the plane, Southwest Airlines to be specific, this particular Monday, flying up from Oklahoma City to Washington, D.C. to be able to come here to the office, be able to get into a week of work. The plane was absolutely filled with people coming in that also work in D.C. and different agencies, lots of tourist groups that are actually coming up, groups of students that are here. All kinds of folks were in the plane because they were coming to Washington, D.C. because it's the nation's capital. It's the nation's capital and the spot where the entire world, every diplomat from every country, comes to Washington, D.C. to be able to meet with members of the Senate, members of the House, President of the executive team. You come to be able to interact because this is the central point of the government of the United States. They expect to come and to be able to see the White House, be able to see the Capitol, to be able to tour around phenomenal Smithsonian institutions and to be able to see that. But this is what they also see when they come to Washington, D.C. now. That's the common view that's also around the city. Because in the last few years, since the defund the police movement took over the city council, and the city council in Washington, D.C. did several things. They took out student resource officers in schools, saying that SRO, the student resource officers in schools, they were what they called a pipeline from school to prison. So to solve the issues around schools, they just stopped enforcing in the schools. And you know what's happened? Crime has gone up around schools, and problems have continued in schools. Crime has gone up 25% just in the last year in Washington, D.C., just in the last year. So far in 2023, according to the Metropolitan Police Department, now remember, we're in March of 2023. So far in 2023, there's already been 38 homicides in this city, 215 assaults with a dangerous weapon, 298 robberies, 164 burglaries, 1,182 motor vehicle thefts, and from last year to this year, arson is already up 300% in Washington, D.C., and this has become the common sight around the city. What in the world is going on? In the middle of rampant increase in crime in Washington, D.C., the D.C. City Council's response to this in an overwhelming vote was to reduce penalties for felonies and to be able to say if you commit a misdemeanor, then you've actually got to have a jury trial as well, knowing full well that would clog up the courts and basically misdemeanors would never be heard. And so they just wouldn't happen. No one would actually get a misdemeanor record in Washington, D.C. So their plan to end this rapid increase in crime is just not to enforce the law. And if you were caught, to get out faster, to be able to get back to the street, to be able to reoccur crime again. Listen, there are amazing people that live in this area in Washington, D.C. Remarkable residents that love this city and love this country, and they do not want to be afraid for their kids going to school. We had a gentleman that actually worked full-time to provide what they call safe passages for kids to be able to get back and forth from their homes to their school, that he worked, his whole focus was just to be able to bring down crime in Washington, D.C., was murdered not long ago on one of those same streets in D.C. This should not be so for this great capital and for this great nation. And the response should not be, we're just not going to enforce the law. That's what the D.C. Council has said they're going to do. To her credit, the mayor of Washington, D.C. vetoed that bill when it came out of the city council, and the city council overrode her veto and said, no, we're going to do it anyway. Now in response, Senator Bill Hagerty has brought up what's called a Congressional Review Act, a challenge to this, and it's taken the next step to be able to say, not just a Congressional Review Act, but to be able to say Congress has the responsibility and the right to be able to actually watch over what happens here. This is not outside the bounds of Congress's responsibility. From the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, line 17, says this. Here's a responsibility of Congress. Congress should exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district as may be by cessation of a particular state's and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of government of the United States. That's describing where we are right now. In our constitutional responsibility, Congress has the responsibility to oversee what is happening in Washington, D.C., and to make sure that this area is a safe place. Now, Congress in decades past has passed over what's called the home rule to Washington, D.C., to say to the City Council, you have a responsibility to be able to make decisions for what's going on. But Congress still has the congressional, constitutional responsibility to be able to oversee D.C. So it is entirely appropriate for Senator Hagerty to be able to bring this up and to say it's time that Congress steps in on the City Council and speaks out for our constitutional obligation and says we cannot have rampant crime in the seat of our republic. So this vote that's coming up tomorrow is going to override this City Council. And it's hard to believe that the United States Congress has to vote to override a City Council vote. But that is our constitutional responsibility, and we should take that in to be able to do it. This is important for the safety of all those folks that were on that plane with me, for all the folks that are coming next week from Oklahoma that'll be on spring break. This city will be full of Oklahomans coming to be able to visit all these museums, and it needs to be a safe place for them to be able to be, and it needs to be a spot that they want to be able to come to, not a spot that looks like this everywhere all over the streets. This should not be so. So it is time that we speak out for a simple principle: defunding the police, decriminalizing criminal activity, taking out school resource officers out of schools and saying we just won't enforce the law doesn't stop crime. It accelerates crime. And for the good people of Washington, D.C., they just want a safe city to live in. And for the folks that work and tour here, they just want to come to a safe place where they're not afraid. Let's invite them to come see the Capitol, not see this all over the city. With that, I yield the floor.